So what's next for Netanyahu and Israel? For that and much more, let's bring in our panel. Ruthie Blum is a columnist for the Jewish News Syndicate and Jerusalem Post. She joins us from New York. Also from New York, Reis is Director for Policy and Strategy at the New Israel Fund. And Bernard Avishai is a professor with a focus on political economy at Dartmouth College and a regular contributor to the New Yorker magazine. He joins us from New Hampshire. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Bernard Avishai, let me start with you. This is quite a development for Israel, coming at a time which, as our correspondent just told us, when the country is in political limbo. Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, has been Israel's longest-serving prime minister. Is this the beginning of the end for him?
Well, apparently not. You know, he speaks of a coup by the state's prosecutor and the attorney general, but in a way what he's done is he's prompted a kind of preemptive counter-coup where he's denying the precedent, which is that when prime ministers are indicted, they must resign. Now, according to the law, they don't actually have to. Only ministers must resign. It seems obvious that a prime minister should, and two prime ministers in the past have, and I must add, not for things they did while they were in office. So this is a prime minister who has committed crimes in office, or at least is indicted for them, and refuses to resign, and is really going to war preemptively against the state apparatus that's nailed him. There is no necessity for him to resign according to law. There have been two elections in which his transitional status, he's now the prime minister of a transitional government, there's no law that, there's no election that has confirmed him in that office, but there's also no election that's dislodged him. So we have a pretty serious situation here.
Ruthie Blum, this is the first time that a sitting Israeli prime minister has been indicted. And as we said in our introduction, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been lashing out. This is more of what he said. Let's listen to it.
I won't let the lie win. I will continue to lead the country according to the law, exactly as written. I will continue to lead the country with responsibility, with dedication, and with care for the security and the future of all of us, and for our country and our democracy, and for the rule of law and for justice. We need to do one thing. We need at last to investigate the investigators. Thank you.
So, Ruthie, here we have the Prime Minister saying we need to investigate the investigators. What do you make of this indictment?
Well, I think he's right. Anybody paying attention to the interrogations that were leaked by the police, which is another story, it's clear that this was a political move more than a legal one. And Netanyahu may be making a political mistake by not stepping down, but he has every legal right to do so. And in fact, I think justice is on his side. Because if you examine what the indictments are, and even listen to what has been leaked by the police itself, the indictments are laughable.
Reis, are these indictments laughable? Is justice on the side of Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, and it's good to be in conversation with my panelists here and with you as well. Let me just say that in December of 2018, Benjamin Netanyahu dissolved Knesset as part of a legal strategy. He wanted to go into his defending his case against the state with the support of the Israeli electorate on his side. In addition to that, he wanted to assemble a coalition that would deliver a special law designed for him that would provide immunity from all legal prosecution and an insurance policy, what's known as the override clause, which was an amendment to Israel's basic law, effectively removing from the Supreme Court its power of judicial review. In all of those things, Benjamin Netanyahu has failed. He's emerged without a mandate from the people of Israel, and now he faces the law alone as a man before the law. And anyone who watched Attorney General Avishai, who was appointed by Benjamin Netanyahu and served as an political aide to Netanyahu prior, knows that he is a faithful servant of the law and is convinced, I think, that he is discharging his duties faithfully with sobriety and that the charges are heavy indeed.
Ruthie Blum, what do you make of that, that the Attorney General is acting within the law here?
No, he is absolutely acting within the law, and I think that Mandelblit, the Attorney General, was severely misled by the state attorney, Shai Nitzan. And this is sort of complex internal Israeli politics. But what is clear here is that Netanyahu is saying, he's saying that he's innocent of these charges and that he doesn't feel that he should step down and let those people who are going after him politically win a legal battle as opposed to a political one. Now, it's also not accurate that he doesn't have a mandate from the public. In fact, the April 9th elections, Knesset elections in Israel, actually saw Netanyahu win. What happened there was that at the last minute, the head of the Israel Beitenu party, Avigdor Lieberman, who not only had been part of the right-wing bloc, but had said that he was going to join a coalition led by Netanyahu, he's the one who pulled that support at the last minute. And that's why Netanyahu couldn't form a government, and that's why there was a second round of elections in September. Still again in September, the right-wing bloc garnered a majority. All of the people who voted, even for other parties, if they're on the right, were aware that they were voting for Netanyahu as prime minister, because that's the way the system works in Israel.
All right, at this point, let me bring in Moien Odeh right here with me in the studio. He is an attorney focusing on human rights and international law. Moien, great to have you with us in the studio. We're talking about the indictment against the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Does this change anything as far as the Palestinians are concerned?
Short answer, no, because we as Palestinians, we don't think that the new prime minister, if there will be a new prime minister, will change the general policies towards Palestinians. Even the Gantz and his white and blue party.
That's Benny Gantz, the leader of the Blue and White Coalition, yeah.
Never, he didn't, maybe he has a little bit different positions rather than Netanyahu, but he's still, regarding the Palestinian issues, he's exactly, somehow, is in the same position, plus minus.
Right. Bernard Avishai, listening to Ruthie Blum a moment ago there, do you see a political motive behind this?
Well, look, clearly I don't. But I think in order to unpack why I don't, it might take more than the half hour of this program. Netanyahu was indicted. Anyone who reads the indictment would see that he bribed the head of a large conglomerate, promising him favors, regulatory favors, which eventually led to that mogul, the head of Bezek, the biggest telecom firm in the country, to gain advantages of hundreds of millions of dollars. And in return, there's a very rich trail that showed how the head of that conglomerate skewed the newscasts to be favorable to Netanyahu. There were two other cases in which he wasn't actually accused of fraud and bribery. He was accused of not keeping faith with his responsibility as a public servant. All of these cases have been looked over for the last 2 years. The idea that Shai Nitzan, the state prosecutor, is on a personal vendetta against Netanyahu is clearly false. The attorney general who looked over the charges was himself a Netanyahu appointee and was very loyal to him and was the secretary of the cabinet. There's no reason at all to think of this as a political vendetta. Now, as to whether or not he won the last election, the idea that somehow there's this mystical thing called a right-wing bloc, and that everyone who voted for every member of the various parties that constitute what Ruth considers that bloc understood that Netanyahu was going to be the prime minister is also false. In fact, Avigdor Lieberman, who holds the balance of power, had a surplus vote agreement with Blue and White, the opposition party, in the last election, and made it clear that he expected both Blue and White and Likud to form a national unity government. People who voted for the Likud may well have thought that they were voting for that, and it's only because Netanyahu could not get immunity in such an agreement that he basically torpedoed the negotiations. So I think we have to be a little more cautious in our summaries here.
Okay. Ruthie, I'm going to give you a chance to quickly respond, then I want to get to Harry. Go ahead, Ruthie. And I think we have lost Ruth. She's back with us. Go ahead.
Okay. What you're saying about the election in the surplus vote agreement, you're talking about the September election. But the election in April, prior to the election in April, Lieberman vowed that he would join a coalition led by Likud, headed by Netanyahu. So, you know, we had 2 elections just recently. And it is also true that Netanyahu's power has been decreasing, did decrease between April and September. That is true. However, he wasn't more defeated, let's say, than his rivals. And as to the fact that Mandelblit was an appointee of Netanyahu's, that's absolutely true. But most of Netanyahu's political rivals today were members of Likud, in Blue and White, I mean, were also associated with Netanyahu. Netanyahu has many character flaws. I'm just arguing that he's not a criminal or corrupt.
All right, let me go to Harry Reis. Harry, Israeli newspapers are reporting that this prime minister is not going to go down without a fight. In fact, the newspaper Maariv says that Netanyahu will, in the words of the newspaper, set everything ablaze. He won't stop until it is all rubble. Can the prime minister cause chaos in Israel?
Yes, I think that's quite right. And I think some of what we're hearing here tonight is in part a feature of that, which is that the prime minister and the right-wing bloc that he commands have decided that in order to secure Benjamin Netanyahu's personal future and fortune from justice and accountability, they've decided to go on a full-on assault on the very notion of an independent judiciary and the independent professional legal apparatus that is designed in any democracy to hold those who are in power accountable. And we're seeing this phenomenon not only in Israel, but in our own country, in the United States as well. Populists, authoritarian populists, lash out at the legitimacy of other branches of government. And if you scroll through the tweets of President Donald Trump and you compare them to the recent statements of Benjamin Netanyahu describing his appointee, Attorney General Avishai Mandelblit, you'll see very many similarities there. And it's notable that the Chief Justice of Israel's Supreme Court, Esther Hayut, over the course of this many months of incitement and delegitimization of the judicial branch, called this campaign that's currently in full swing degrading, lowly, and unrestrained. And I think that's very apt to describe the moment that we're in, and it has the prospect to unleash chaos and even violence. So as somebody who's concerned for the future of Israel's democracy and civic equality, I think it's a very dangerous game to be playing.
Moien Odeh, as you point out, this may not have great consequences for the Palestinians in Gaza or on the West Bank, but let's talk about the Israeli Arabs, the Arabs who are in Israel. They form a significant bloc in the Israeli parliament, or the Knesset as it's known. Does this indictment change any kind of coalition dynamic that they might get involved in?
First of all, we should remember always that Arabs looks always like the black goat in any elections, because usually Netanyahu uses them to push his supporters to vote more and more for him. Even until recent days, we all were following the news that Netanyahu was telling his people, on all the Israelis, that it will be very, very dangerous if Benny Gantz succeeded to create a coalition with the Arabs. He always said that the Arabs in the government is a very dangerous thing for us as Israelis and for the whole state in general. Which means that taking Netanyahu out of the picture is very, very good for the Arab Israelis. This is from one side. From the other side, you never know if Benny Gantz and the white and who are really interested to have the Arab joint list or the Arabs in general as part of the government or as part of the policies like decision makers in the future, because it's until now it's not clear at all if they use them just to fear Netanyahu that they are able to create that coalition, or just they are really were interested to create kind of cooperation between both sides. This is one. Two, we should keep in mind that it's still the way is still very long until Netanyahu will be really indicted and leave the whole scene, the political scene, which means that until now, actually, we as Arab Israelis, we don't know what will really happen in all of this. But I believe if there will be a new elections, which is also not clear, the Arab joint list will get more seats, and this will give it more power to at least to be a strong player in the field.
Right, Bernard Avishai, what are the chances of this being a very long, drawn-out trial, and what impact would that have on these attempts to form a government? As we know, Israel's had 2 elections in the space of 6 months.
Look, no poll says that a new election is going to change the balance of forces in the Knesset very much. It's possible that there will be some shift because a number of people on the margins will be upset with the prime minister for not abiding by the rule of law. But I have to say, what Netanyahu's unleashing here is more than just a crisis for the rule of law. I think he's rather intentionally, through his campaign as well, unleashing a crisis for Israel's democracy in the broader sense. I mean, according to Israel's Law of Human Dignity, which is the closest thing it has to a Bill of Rights, Israel is to be a Jewish and democratic state. And those two ideals, Jewish and democratic, could live together compatibly, but there's a way that they could become contradictory. And the way they become contradictory is where you have a definition of Jewish, which is basically theocratic and exclusive. And what Netanyahu has been doing is really fomenting a tremendous amount of antagonism towards the Arab minority and defining Jewish in ways that are compatible with his theocratic allies. This is very unhealthy in a country as plural as Israel is. It's not pluralist as it needs to be, but it's a plural country. It has a minority of 20% Arab citizens. And Netanyahu has basically been running his campaign and now trying to justify his fomenting anger at people who are responsible for the rule of law by saying that he's saving them from a government which will have Arabs involved in supporting it. This is tremendously destructive to the society, tremendously dangerous. He's playing a very, very dangerous game. And it's a game that will not just pit Arabs against Jews, but Jews against Jews, people in Tel Aviv who are much more cosmopolitan and globalized against people in Jerusalem and the development towns and the settlements who are far more theocratic in their outlook. It's a very, very dangerous game.
What do you make of that, Moien? Is it very dangerous?
I think it's extremely dangerous, and I think it's not only dangerous. He is justifying that the Arabs are not part of the country. They are not citizens. They are traitors, and we should treat them in this way. Which means, like, if tomorrow morning somebody decided to take his arms and start shooting the Arab because he will believe that he's doing the right or she's doing the right thing, I think the first one to be blamed will be Netanyahu and his campaign against the Arab Israelis in Israel.
Harry Reis, there is a report from the Israeli television network Channel 12, which is reporting that several Likud members, Likud party members, that's the Prime Minister's party, of course, have been meeting behind the scenes to try and oust the Prime Minister. What do you make of that?
Well, first, I would just like to add my assent and agreement to what was just said about the destructiveness of what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing to Israel's political culture. What we've seen over the past several months is his deliberate political strategy to pit citizen against citizen, to use the politics of fear to divide, and I think it's a devastating phenomenon that we're seeing not only in Israel but around the world today. And as a Jewish American, as a Jewish person, I know the power in politics of utilizing fear of the other for political gain. And I think it's one that the Jewish state should avoid. But in a positive sense, I think one of the most interesting things to come out of this moment is that the Likud party's deliberate campaign to suppress the vote of minority Palestinian citizens by installing surveillance technology in Arab-majority polling stations really did fail. What happened was the Arab electorate turned out and was part of blocking Netanyahu's path to a return to power. And one of the most exciting things that happened, there was a glimmer of a possibility that there might be a Zionist left government led by Benny Gantz that included a cooperative framework with Moien Odeh, the head of the Joint List, which represents Arab majority parties, to build a framework for a government based on civic equality and a commitment to achieving peace with Palestinians. And I think that was an exciting potential pathway and one of the roads not taken that has led to the current political impasse.
And Harry, very quickly, what do you make of this attempt by backbenchers to oust the Prime Minister?
I think it's natural in seeing, after the indictment came down, a wounded Prime Minister who's increasingly a liability to his party, the Likud, for the senior ministers in the Likud to realize that going down with the ship may not be in the best interests of their party.
Right.
Already during the last few months, Prime Minister Netanyahu floated the idea of holding a Likud party primary, and within minutes, Gideon Sa'ar, who's one of the top ministers in the Likud, tweeted back, "I'm ready," I think, which indicates that there's energy within the Likud party to put the Netanyahu years behind them, allow the Prime Minister to face justice as a citizen, and potentially negotiate on that basis to form a national unity government.
Right. In fact, Gideon Sa'ar is being touted as the man to take over.
Except that it's a little bit like the American Republicans, just to be clear. It's very hard for leaders of the Likud to get out in front of their skis here. Gideon Sa'ar is the only public rival of Netanyahu, but the other ones, including Chaim Katz, who's head of the Likud Central Committee, has said that he and Netanyahu will propose to the Central Committee of the Likud a preemption of primaries. Look, if there's a group of people in the Likud who want to oust the Prime Minister, there's something very simple they can do. They can just go to the president and say, right now, go to the president and say, we don't support Prime Minister Netanyahu. We will create a faction in the Knesset that will join with Benny Gantz and create a national unity coalition. Yeah. As soon as Gantz is Prime Minister, Netanyahu will no longer be Prime Minister. At that point, he'll be a citizen defending himself in court, and the Likud can hold primaries. It's really a very, very simple matter. They just need the guts to do it. But, you know, that's the same of, you know, Republicans having the guts to defy Trump.
Right. Moien Odeh, the relationship with the United States, the Trump administration has made no secret of the fact that it supports Benjamin Netanyahu. Right. If he goes, will that relationship change? And we also have to remember that the administration just announced just a few days ago that settlements are essentially legal. They don't see it as being illegal.
Right. So First of all, I don't know, like, if the relationship between the U.S. and the Palestinians are related to the relationship between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. I'm not sure if the good relation between both of them is one of the reasons why there's a very bad relationship and what very bad decisions from Trump against the Palestinians. Maybe because recently, I think even the last days, Trump trying to take himself away from Netanyahu, and I believe he will try, because he always said that he's supporting Israel and not one person, which will mean that maybe he will continue supporting Israel as he think he does.
Okay, and that's where we are going to have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.